Hi, I'm Andre J, and welcome to March's episode of Patreon Wage Labor Video. Today we're going to be talking about Wavepool HD, Artificial Life HD, and Temporal Vortex HD. These are all the VSEJET ports of some of the VSERPI stalwarts. So these are some of the newer things that, well, I haven't really been working on them. I worked on them for about 2 weeks in the winter and I finished them up. So these are things I have sold, some Wavepool HDs. They will be available publicly as downloads for everyone, as images to download for everyone in a couple of weeks after this lands. People will have their own Wavepool HDs in their hands a couple weeks after this video lands. Everyone who updates their gravity waves to the new gravity waves image I'll be putting out also in a couple weeks will be able to play all of these off of their gravity waves units. So that is some information on what's going on here. And of course, this thing of me up in the top corner is not through Wavepool HD, but the big, really blobby one in the middle. That's me running through Wavepool HD. Before we get started, just a couple notes. Patreon wage labor thing. This is what I'm doing through my Patreon, patreon.com/Andre_J, Andre with an I. People vote every month. Currently, the only acceptable options for voting are video topics because the Patreon is not making very much money. And because sales are not great, people aren't really signing up for my online classes. In general, my income situation through video art is not really great. Basically, this is sort of a last-ditch effort I'm making to try to stay involved with like video art and video synth world in the face of like not really having like a stable economic basis for doing so. And realistically, if like things aren't really looking up by like the end of, I'll probably do another sales push starting in next October. And if things keep looking crappy, probably around by the end of the year is when I have to make the ultimate decision of do I put all of this shit on the back burner for indefinite period of my life. So yeah, the Patreon is probably the best option for folks to try to keep support for me having this YouTube channel that I do videos, explainer videos like this for, and also for doing development. A number of people on the Patreon have asked if they could use the funds for that for development, and I've been saying over and over again, and we'll reiterate now that there needs to be more monthly income coming in from Patreon for me to even consider doing commissioned updates and development through that. So sort of as like a little example of what would happen if there was more support for the Patreon is if we get up to $800 a month, then I will make an updated image for the VSERPI wave pool that allows for save states. And if it stays at 800 the next month, then I would make a save state image for artificial life, spectral mesh, temporal vortex, etc., auto waves, and so on and so on. And yeah, part of the reason I'm doing things this way is that like, it's like, I think a lot of people out there in the world are just getting used to this idea of like labor, of just pretending that labor doesn't actually exist. Because a lot, I mean, when I was just making a lot more money off of sales and stuff, like I could do, make like fuck off videos like all the time and like make all kinds of crazy, ridiculous updates and pour all that kind of effort into that. And just not even really think about it. Now that things are tighter, I actually, on my end, I have to actually like plan out schedules and like budget things out. So even just like something like making a video like this, it essentially costs me money by taking me time away from doing other things that I would otherwise have to do to generate income. And it is a lot of work to do these things. It's emotional labor because it's something I have to focus on. It's something I have to plan out. It's something I have to like take time away, tear down part of my setup of one hardware thing I'm doing, set up this other thing, and then if I fuck up the video at all, then I have to go in and edit it too. So it's like it's all work. So yeah, a big part of this whole like Patreon wage labor thing is I'm just trying to make explicit to people how much work goes into this shit, and making updates to images and updates to like the old stuff that already exists is just a really massive amount of work that like everyone seems to just completely take for granted these days. I think a little bit of that is just kind of like this general like the sickness of consumerism that infects people, where like like the usual consumerism thing is like, okay, I'm going to look at pictures of the synthesizer. I'm going to keep looking at pictures of the synthesizer. I'll look at the manual. I'll watch some videos of people using it. I'll talk to my friends and like explain to them like how cool it is. And then I'll talk myself into buying it. And then, so there's this huge like desire, this like matrix of desire built up and anticipation built up in your head. And then you get it and you're like, oh shit, this is confusing. I don't actually know how to use this. Maybe I'm going to have to put time into it. And some people put the time into it and figure out how to use it. Some people just like put it away, whatever. But like the desire, the consumerism part, it's really like, it's about anticipating a desire that can never actually be fulfilled. And what like providing like these kind of constant updates thing, like people who are locked into this kind of like update cycle, like give me something new, give me something shiny. It allows them to sort of like turn their old purchase into a new purchase, like so they get that little like anticipation of desire, they get that endorphin rush that they got from first buying it. And most of the time it's really completely sideways to like actual enjoyment of using it or the system itself. So I think, yeah, it's kind of like, it's this thing that like almost anybody who does things that like have some sort of like digital component to them, they have to like offer some kind of like update thing. Otherwise, because it's just normalized. It's normalized that you're always going to be updating things and always like juicing something up. And like, I'm not talking about bug fixes. Like bug fixes are like necessary. That's something that has to be done. And just general like user interface things, improving that, like that's totally solid. That makes sense. But just the whole like adding new flashy bells and whistles. It's like fucking cars. Like there's not like any kind of like new design for cars really that happens. But what does happen is, oh, there's a computer that will like make terrible steering decisions for you. There's a 360-degree camera mounted on top of it. The seats will heat and cool and they'll move in 4 dimensions. Like all this bullshit that doesn't actually provide a new car experience, but it does allow for marketing to like pretend that like something new has happened with your car. So yeah, that's my feeling on updates in general. Like, I think people get really fucking like hung up on the whole idea that like their experiences should be constantly changing and constantly evolving. But realistically, if you think about it, in terms of like how a synthesis system works, like, I mean, just think about something as like pretty simple as like a mini Moog or like a DX7 or like, I don't know, like Korg monopoly or something. Let's just think about like iconic like synths that people have like used. Like there's no fucking necessary update to like a mini Moog. Like that is a solid system for generating a very wide range of sounds, and you could play with one of those like over and over again and like still do new stuff with it. The system itself is already like, it's a synthesis system. It's for you to then generate new things from. Like, and yeah, like the stuff I've made here, like even if I never fucking updated it ever again, like they would still be incredibly powerful, amazing tools that you can do a wide range of things with. So yeah, like people who get really hung up on the whole updates, like give me new updates all the time, like this is just kind of like, just like want to ask you to like think about like that whole thing, like what is it really about? Is it about like there's actually a serious flaw in this system that like makes you unable to use it properly, or is it just like, are you locked into this whole like lusting after novelty thing that makes no difference to actually how you actually experience using the thing? It's just in your mind about like desire and anticipation. So yeah, that is my talk on updates and desire. And I'm also going to contribute to the updates and desire thing by reiterating. Well, I've talked everyone out of that idea and pointed out that it's possibly some kind of sickness. I will also update the VSERPI, and then after that, I would update the VSEJET to also for wave pool, artificial life, temporal vortex, etc. to all have like save states for them. So that's pretty juicy, right? But yeah, you got to support the Patreon. We got to get Patreon to at least $800 a month because that's the point when I will allow for people to vote and suggest ideas for like updates. And yeah, the other caveat for that whole thing is that like this isn't something where you just like are gonna be able to like demand any updates and I'll make them. Like they do have to be something that like justifiably like improves the system, works within the system well, and isn't just like adding like general like bloat to the whole thing. Like I'm not going to put sample players into all of the VSEJet. On the other hand, what I would do is if people were all interested in it and I was getting serious support from the Patreon, I would make my own VSERPI sampler based thing that people could use. Media player and sampler that you could then use. So that's sort of the compromise issue that would work out. Is I'm not just gonna like turn this into a thing where like Patreon people can like I'll just do whatever the Patreon people say because they're paying me. It still has to be something which meets my criteria for like useful and like interesting additions to like the systems that already exist. And I know there are like definitely things like that out there. But also a lot of people do suggest things that I would say are not actually like something that would improve the situation for most users overall, but would simply be like one person's specific use case of like that would make things so much easier for me. But yeah, and the other thing is that like Patreon folks, y'all should probably talk to each other on the Discord because like people keep telling me like in various messages, this is what people really want. This is what people really want. And the only thing I can tell is that there's no actual consensus on what people actually want from the Patreon thing, or what they want from updates, or what sort of things they want me to talk about. It's all kind of like a big mishmash. So maybe talk to each other on the Discord, get together some actual numbers, and then say, okay, maybe all of us are going to vote for this one thing this month, or if like 100 of us all like sign a petition thing and then send Andre an email about this is what we want to see, that actually means something to me. One person saying, I want auto waves updates, like, yeah, sure, like you want them, but like that doesn't tell me anything about the numbers of people that want them. So you can organize things and actually sort of leverage the what I'm offering via Patreon in a more sort of intentional manner. And you could like deal with the fact that like some people want VSERPI updates and some people would want more stuff with gravity waves or VSEJet by just saying I'll vote for this thing for you this month for this phosphorm update this month if you'll vote for me to do the gravity waves update thing next month. Make deals with people. This is how politics works. Does require actually talking to other people, listening to them, communicating, and compromising. So we'll see if that actually happens. But that's just the suggestion I'm making for folks to try to leverage this whole Patreon wage labor thing. In the meanwhile, if we can get Patreon wage labor numbers up to like 600 or so, then I would make more of those the long form like video gear, video mixer explainer videos. And the reason 600 would be the limits for that would be like that's multi-camera setup. That's a couple of days working on something. But yeah, I could do that long-awaited MX1 explainer thing, and then like take a moment to like look at other forms of video gear, other mixers, etc., etc. All right, so that's the preamble right there. What else do we have here? So we're going to talk about WavePool HD. So this is the high definition 720p update of WavePool. I noticed a couple of people saying that 720p isn't really HD these days. which actually it definitely is HD. I was actually looking into like what does HD mean a long time ago, because like I was using it to like sort of like promote certain things, and I was also like, how can you tell what HD means when something says HD? Like, what are the sort of like general standards? And yeah, there's no like explicit sort of IEE standard other than SD is generally speaking. I mean, standard definition SD is always going to be like 4:3 720p by 480 or 525, depending on how you define it, or whichever way. So that's a 4:3 ratio, whereas HD pretty much always will refer to a 16:9 ratio. In practice, what I have seen is HD pretty much most of the time means 720p. Full HD means 1080p, and then 4K and upwards, people will just say 4K, 2K, stuff like that. So, to the best of my knowledge, in any way you slice it, 720p is HD. It's 16:9 aspect ratio. It's what most things that say HD actually like provide as like a maximum, and full HD seems to be 1080, 2K, 4K, 6K, 8K. All of those usually get explicitly like mentioned there. So yeah, Wavepool HD does all the processing at 720p, 1280 by 720. Things you might notice that are different from Wavepool to Wavepool VSERPI to Wavepool VSEJET. The big thing that people are probably going to notice is that if you put an SD input into it, like I said, SD is 4:3. It's just a different shape. And the two options for putting a 4:3 input into SD are to either like squeeze or just like put it in full frame and just have bars on the side, which I thought looked really, really stupid for Wavepool, or to just like zoom it in a bit, so I'm blowing it up a bit and just making sure it fills the screen. So that's what I'm doing here as like the overall thing. If like literally 100 people like message me somewhere, if you get 100-person consensus that you'd rather have like a pillar box option somehow, yeah, I'll put that in too. But I don't think you actually want that. I don't think anybody actually wants that. And if you use the HD option, then it'll just be full frame HD. So that's pretty chill. So that's one of the big differences. Noticing what will happen inside of the feedback. So I'm doing, I'll explain this patch that I started out with later on in this video. But you'll notice when we do the feedback on this, so I just did the usual thing where I just wipe into feedback. Big difference from VSEJET Wavepool HD to VSERPI Wavepool is that you don't see any of that weird kind of like smudging and blending that happens. So the feedback is a lot cleaner. The pixels all pretty much stay exactly where they were, which is usually what you would expect for like digital feedback. So that's kind of nifty. It means you've got a lot more detail going on, and if I do this kind of thing where I just like do a very slight displacement, you can see if we did the same thing on the VSERPI version, it would get pretty smudgy and blurry very, very quickly, whereas this way it's kind of holding, there's a little bit of smudging happening, but it's holding the data pretty well. So higher resolution feedback and overall cleaner within that high resolution, it's like a cleaner experience, if that makes sense. So that's a big difference. And then the other big difference about the Wavepool HD is that the VSERPI Wavepool had a delay time of 2 seconds, and this one we've got a delay of 8 seconds. So let me just try to remember, how do we do frame buffer clear? So there's frame buffer clear. So that means I've got delay pumped all the way up. There's going to be 8 seconds of delay in between the echoes. So you can see that if I just do this. So that's all delay right there. So what that really means for those of you out there using this is that you could actually use this as like an 8-second video looper. So whatever we do within 8 seconds, so let me just hold this here, make sure it would kind of clear out what was happening in the buffer before. So I'm gonna, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's going to do all of those things that I did within that 8-second loop, all of those ridiculous moves, and it's just going to, so I'm not changing anything else about the position or the color or anything else. All I did was just wipe out, and what we have is a looper, an 8-second looper of the video. So that's pretty nifty. That's something you could probably use a lot of. Oh, you can see I did have a little bit of the X displace going on. So every 8 seconds it gets displaced a tiny bit. Other cool things you could do with this as a looper is you just could add, like, I'm just going to bring down the brightness a little bit. So you'll see it gets a little bit darker every time. Getting a little darker, getting a little darker. Let me turn up the sharpen. So it's going to start to grunge up things very, very slowly. So what's going to go on here is we're going to have like some very, very, it's like playing with really long audio delays, but you get like very subtle degradation on each copy. And let me turn sharpen way up here. The exact reasons why like long feedback chains like this are so much different than like the really immediate feedback chains is that, so if we're only delaying things like 1 frame, everything we do kind of like works at 60 hertz or 30 hertz for this for the all of my stuff. All my stuff runs at 30 hertz, meaning that like putting sharpen on something is going to just be on 1 frame that gets fed back on itself over and over again. If we're doing this on 240 frames, it means it takes 8 seconds for 1 single frame's operations to then repeat and add up on each other. So we're still going to get like feedback. It's still going to do all the crazy textured feedback stuff that you expect. Let me bring up the brightness. It's just going to take like so much longer, and it's going to do it in this weird kind of like looping manner instead of being that sort of like instantaneous like goopy movement stuff. Another cool thing that you can do with like really, really long delays, so if whatever sort of things I do kind of quickly within the buffer, so I'm just going to move Y up and down. Let me do that a little bit larger. So those Y movements are going to get lodged in the buffer. So everything I do, if I do geometrical movements like this, and that's me actively doing it, now my hands are free, it's going to keep, it's recorded that motion, not via like any sort of like controller motion recording or whatever. It's just like because I did that in a feedback buffer, it's going to keep doing that over and over again. So these are some like, I would say these would be the biggest places to start experimenting with. If you've got like video oscillators, if you're going to run like artificial life or something into that, you can make like a weird little sample of like something that's happening in artificial life, bypass that, and then just do weird feedbacks, very, very slow-paced feedback processing on that sample over and over again. And here, let me put on some symmetry here. And let me do a little bit of rotation. And let me do some zooming. You notice what I haven't done yet is any of the usual kind of like color-based feedback stuff. So I'm not playing around with the color at all. And this is sort of something that I've been doing a lot more lately. What I've been getting into with playing around with feedback is not the usual kind of like crazy color stuff that you see on like video mixers usually. What I do instead is just keep the color stuff, keep the hue and the saturation more or less static, and maybe I'll play around with brightness a bit, but more of what I'm doing is like taking really, really long delays and just doing tiny little geometry things within them and letting things kind of like build up slowly but surely. And you can see at this point I've done enough of the crazy geometry things that like my face is gone, that loop of me moving around is gone, but all of the sort of like the weird little motion things that are happening got kind of like locked into there. So it's got this weird sort of like looping animation thing happening. So yeah, 8 seconds of delay and the really high resolution buffer means that this is basically can be used as sort of like a video looper. In a way that it would be hard to do the same thing in Wavepool Veserpi because it's just such a short buffer that 2 seconds of looping really isn't that much to like kind of work with. It would just look more like, I don't know, one of those like shitty boomerangs or something. But we can now also start to bring in some color stuff. So I'm just going to bring hue up a little bit. So we're not going to see that immediate kind of like crazy like reaction diffusion like rainbow shit going on again because it's taking so long for things to build up. If you think about it, we're at 240 frames, and 240 frames is 240 times 1 frame. So whatever you do in 1 frame of delay is going to take 240 times longer to sort of build up to the same action. Yeah, this is getting pretty weird here. So yeah, that was the one thing I sort of wanted to point out. This is something that's really, really different from how the Veserpi Wavepool works, and something that I think people should really leverage and experiment with more, is this kind of like looping slow feedback mode. It's been my favorite thing to play with recently, and yeah, I think y'all will really enjoy this kind of thing. The flip side to doing really, really long feedback is you also just have to have the patience to sit there for the really, really long feedback, which from when I've talked to other people about working with really, really long feedback stuff, they're just kind of like, I don't have time. Let me just make it fast. There. No, it's fast. That's the fast feedback. And that is pretty fast. Woo! Alright, let's do a reset there. The other thing I sort of wanted to point out is I don't think people have really kind of like poked into this as much, at least not as far as I can tell from like what I see about how people use this. But this is the same thing. Wavepool, Veserpi Wavepool has this, so does Wavepool HD, but because Wavepool HD has higher resolution, it's going to like be a lot more punchier on it, is the video reactive mode. So the video reactive mode, it's engaged with hitting the S button, which is right next to delay time. So it's the S button all the way on the left, or the right, all the way on the right of the controller. And what video reactive mode does is, let me just wipe all the way to feedback again. I'm going to hit S, and I'm going to move the X button, or the X slider. What video reactive mode does is take the video data, the brightness of the video data, and map that to a parameter. So it allows for, like, a really, really like striking way to do this is Z. So that's Z displacement, moving it up, and here I'm moving it down. So it's basically turning your input video into a video, using that as sort of like a low frequency oscillator for the video. Kind of crazy. So you can see what happens. I wipe in and out, and we're doing that. That's pretty wild. A number of different ways you can use this. So kind of like the most obvious and simple way is, so I've got video reactive mode on now. I'm going to turn on toroidal universe and make things kind of bright so I make sure that the video doesn't go anywhere. So let me use sharpen first. Let me video reactive sharpen, and then video reactive X, video reactive Y. So now we're getting this kind of like smudgy field. These are kind of moving around. Turn up the brightness a little bit more. Oh, if we turn down brightness, that's also kind of an interesting one. So using the brightest parts of the video to kind of mask out what's going on in the feedback. You can see my face is kind of like plopping in and out there. My glasses are much darker than my face, I guess. Crank up sharpen even more. So there we go. So the brightest things in the background are getting more of that sort of like sharpen reaction diffusion thing going on there. And let me just tweak brightness till we get to a point where we've got all of that. I'm going to turn down overall brightness. So that's pretty cool. Turn back on video reactive mode, and now I'm going to do hue offset. So this is pretty similar to what I was starting out with, is just setting hue offset as like the video reactive control. It takes the video data, of course, and then kind of like maps that to how much hue offset you've got, which uses basically the feedback to kind of like outline the video itself. So you can see my hands as I move my hands up and down. That's pretty clearly outlined. You can see my glasses still. I'm going to bump up brightness a little bit more. Other cool things. I'm using this to invert. So we've got inverted temporal filter as a basis, and then I'm going to turn up a positive temporal filter on the other way. So now we're getting this kind of weird stuff. Let me reset everything, show you another cool thing you could do with a temporal filter in video reactive mode. So let me just set X displays here. And let's say temporal filter, let's turn temporal filter up on video reactive mode and then turn it down normally. So the video reactive mode and the regular things interact. They just kind of add one to another. So you can use the regular controls to set basically what your 0 point is, and then the video reactive mode will move off of that. And if you don't really understand what that means, just try with X displays and it'll make sense. Try putting video reactive mode on and off and just working with X displays like that. So now I sort of reset the 0 of the X display, so you can see down in the corner we're getting these like really complicated things. I think that's just like my shirt right here. My shirt has some complicated brightness going on it. That's pretty nifty. And now let me just bring out all of the video. So now it's just going to kind of keep moving like that. My original goal with the video reactive mode, why I developed it first to start off with, was that I'd been playing around with LFOs and video waves. But the thing about using like a one-dimensional LFO to manipulate video is that it's one-dimensional. It's only controlling one dimension. Video is a two-dimensional medium. It's more dimensions than that, but easily speaking, it's two-dimensional. So wouldn't we want to have two-dimensional LFOs to work with things? So I set up so I could use artificial life on the desktop as a modulator for video waves using the two-dimensional video oscillators, and have that sort of be controlling how the feedback flows around. And it was super cool. But of course you don't need to have a video oscillator to do that. You can just use video data of any form. You could use a VHS tape. You could use just the USB camera pointed at whatever band you're doing visuals for or whatever. or just like a USB camera and like have like a little like flashlight or something around. Or you could be doing video feedback on a separate channel and then bring that in and use that video feedback to just mask out different parts of the feedback within WavePool HD. So it's really about opening up the sort of modulator, how to like modulate everything in WavePool HD without having to have like a built-in set of video oscillators on it too. Because you notice like everything else, just about everything else for the base VSERPI, so you have artificial life, spectral mesh, temporal vortex, all of those use video oscillators. Artificial life is video oscillators. Spectral mesh and temporal vortex are both using video oscillators to drive other kinds of video synthesis techniques. So yeah, WavePool HD or WavePool Original, these were the only ones that like didn't have a video oscillator built in. So I wanted to figure out some way to have a video oscillator controlling parameters. So that's why the video reactive mode. So yeah, I think those are two pretty good examples of things you can do. And like I said, video reactive mode is on WavePool Original flavor as well, but it's of course not as detailed, so you can't get quite the same amount of like crazy little texture things going on within it. So yeah, that's WavePool HD. Next, we're going to look at Artificial Life HD. So there are some tiny changes I made when I was porting the Artificial Life HD. Something you might notice right away of a difference is when bringing external video in. On the old version, on the VSERPI version, there was a sort of an unintended thing where it was bringing in some of the color from the original external video, and I fixed that in this version so it's not bringing in any of the color. I'm not really sure if that counts as a bug or not. I didn't really intend it, but I can see a lot of places where people would want that to actually happen. So I wasn't really sure about like ultimately what to do with it. But yeah, if I ever end up doing the save state update thing for all the old VSERPI, then I would just probably toss a little fix on that for that. So that's one of the big ones. So it means that when you do the sort of colorizing mode on Artificial Life HD, you're only going to have the colors that you bring in through the colorizer on Artificial Life. So that's pretty much probably the biggest difference people would notice. The other thing we've got is that something else I did was I played around with sort of the pulse width and pulse width modulation stuff, because I wasn't super happy with how it was implemented for all of the different oscillators. So now when we do pulse width for sine wave and saw wave, then we'll see that the pulse width will actually, you can get a much cleaner, tinier line off of that, but it's still, you can see the range is still going from like 0 to 1. Still got the full range, we just have a skinnier line. Of course, the reason I wanted a skinnier line is that you can start to do stuff like this, where like I'm bringing in external video just a little bit, and we can have those tiny lines kind of like moving over it like that. So that's pretty nice. And then if I go back in and start to do some phase modulation, and let me change the direction of phase modulation. So now we're going to get this really nice effect. So I'm using oscillator 1 to oscillate to phase mod oscillator 2. They both have the same horizontal alignment, but the width of oscillator 1 is much less than that of oscillator 2. And then if I go in and start playing around with the width of oscillator 2, you can see this is what happens if we've got a really the least width, and here's maximum width. So maximum width, of course, doesn't really, it's just all white. Here's about medium, so we get that kind of like fun little ripple in there. and then here's minimum. So we're just getting those kind of like interesting lines. Let me change. We can go in and have rate mod on both the oscillators. So now you can see the kind of like ringing between the rates on each one. And we can have them kind of like doing rate mod back and forth. So this is a pretty fun thing to do for sort of like masking. It's sort of like a threshold and mask of like an external video source. So you can use this if you're like trying to do some more dynamic keying things farther down the chain. Like for example, say you're shooting live video of people who are moving around. You're working on some sort of video of like people moving around, and your video doesn't have enough like black space or negative space to actually do any decent keying into. Someone asked me to try to like work with like footage of someone like skiing the other day, and I was just like, you can't fucking key into skiing. There's no keying. You key into white and you've keyed everything out. You got to make sure the people skiing at the very least made sure to wear all matte black on that day. But you could take footage that doesn't have like a huge amount of dynamic range, and then use this kind of technique to then sort of like create more holes, more negative space in the video. And negative space that's kind of moving around in an interesting kind of scanning way. So that's something which is pretty cool. And of course, if we change that over to square waves for both of them, then we're going to get that kind of like hard edge. Actually, I think that's a saw wave. Here's a square wave. All right, did we figure out a glitch here? All right, we may have found our first glitch in Wavepool in Artificial Life HD. Good thing I didn't release this in full. Let's see if I can recreate that. So square wave, got that really tiny here. Let me bring in external video. Got a tiny square wave. And now we're moving that around. Now let me do some phase mod on that square wave. Make sure that's a square as well. And then make sure this is aligned correctly. So yeah, I'm going to have to experiment with recreating that one. But now we're able to do that really sort of like scanning way over it now. I think maybe what's going on is we can bring in more positive space. I accidentally put in a little bit of feedback there, so that's what's going on there. Let me do that rate mod thing as well. So now we've got some interesting masking things happening here. So there, that's a really, really simple patch you can do that allows you to kind of like dial in how much negative space you get from the video. Let's see, other stuff. I feel like probably people didn't play around with this so much, but you've got the pulse width modulation, cross pulse width modulation between the two oscillators. So let me make sure the oscillators are kind of aligned here, and let me make sure oscillators are kind of moving around in an opposite direction. So we got that. Now let's do some pulse width modulation feedback. And bring in some color too. That always makes the feedback a little bit more dynamic. Now let me do some amp mod. So this is with so now we're doing amp mod and phase mod feedback. Now let me set oscillator 1 to rotate. So now we're going to see how these things work when they get out of phase lock with one another. Let's go back in and play around with these colors a little bit more. All right, blue and gold, that's pretty nice. And this is both with square wave oscillators. Now I've just changed oscillator 1 to be a sine wave. So now we're getting some interesting moire patterns in there with the feedback. Yeah, and then you can also play around with, let me change the modulation on oscillator 2 to be feedback. So now we can have like an extra layer of feedback, just video feedback on oscillator 2. See, if I just do that a tiny bit, then it's going to kind of like create that weird sense of space where the feedback is kind of blobbing out in front of everything. That's pretty nifty. Oh, I like these colors. That's pretty aesthetic. Playing around with the frequency on both oscillators. Another thing you'll probably notice from using Artificial Life HD is that frequency ranges are changed, and this is mostly because it's larger resolution and the shape of the canvas is different. So people may be happy, people might be upset about it. It is just a fact. There's a larger resolution and a different shaped canvas, so that kind of thing is going to be different. Let's see, some other fun things you can do with... Alright, so I sort of like... See, we turned off the square wave, so now this is sine to sine wave here. Some other fun things we can do with this. So just the real simple doing like phase mod feedback, still pretty solid. Oscillator 2 or oscillator 1 to be a saw wave. Changes up how the feedback is going to work here. Got that rotating still, of course. So yeah, aside from the other things, of course, just the main difference is that you've got a higher resolution. Oh yeah, I guess there is one other kind of big difference I can think about between the two is that the VSEJET Artificial Life had to work at half resolution, so it was working at 240p instead of 480. So it was working at half the SD resolution just because of processor limits, whereas Artificial Life HD is working at the full 720 by 1280 by 720 resolution. So this is processing and outputting at the same resolution, whereas I was just using pixel doubling on the VSEJET one to make up for the lack of processing power to do all the oscillator stuff I wanted to do. So yeah, I guess that's another difference is that this will just it'll have cleaner lines. It's not going to be as like chunky and grungy as Artificial Life VSEJET was. So not just because it's a higher resolution, but because the processing is actually happening at the same resolution as the output. So that's pretty cool. All right, so that is Artificial Life HD. Oh yeah, there's also chromatic aberration HD. I made sure to include that in this thing because I like it a lot. But nobody cares about chromatic aberration but me. The search for Sasquatch. But yeah, that's this. Still pretty cool. You should check it out sometime, but you probably won't. And now we come to temporal vortex HD. So temporal vortex HD is when I was working on the port for this, I experimented. This is the one I experimented with the most because I was really hopeful about doing some higher resolution stuff for the processing of this. But it turns out couldn't really beef up the resolution much, the processing resolution much. Couldn't even really. I did end up just sticking with the pillar boxes on this because I felt for this specific one, it makes the most sense, at least for this the first version I release. If people really want it to have full frame, could try out the zooming thing. Try out tossing out some pixels to try to like make up for that. See how that would work. But yeah, the biggest difference is that the Serpy temporal vortex would really only work. I couldn't get it up to like a full 30 frames per second. It just had to run at like, it would run at like 24 peak, but for some of the oscillators and some of the more complicated like things it would do, it would drag down to like 18 or so. And yeah, 18 or below, that's really like, that's when you notice it. 24, 22, you can have things running at that and you'll still kind of like be like, this is video. But yeah, so the biggest difference here is this just runs at 30 frames a second pretty stably. So that's kind of cool. That makes a big difference on stuff. Just run through some of the basic temporal vortex stuff. But yeah, we'll keep the oscillator thing up there so you can see as I modulate the oscillator, that brings up a lot of different things that happen inside of the because this is the triangle wave oscillator, so it's going back and forth in time. And I can change the amplitude so we can see different amplitudes, but the same wave shape and the same rate and frequency will give like way different things. We can change the orientation of the warping of the vortexing, so that's different vortex orientation. We can change the frequency, make it really noisy. You can see that I have hue shifting lights on in here. Hue shifting lights and temporal vortex do some pretty cool stuff together. Overall resolution, bring it up and down. Those different kind of like wave patterns. Do those radial things. Square wave. It's always kind of nifty with this because that just makes like those like weird sort of like concentric different time things. I always found this to be pretty fun to do with video oscillator stuff and video feedback stuff, grabbing from different slices in the time, and then you do the different arrangements where you mix between the two oscillators. So yeah, not a lot of huge changes to temporal vortex HD. I wasn't planning on. The only one I was selling this time around was Wavepool HD. So at some point next, when I do the sales push again next October, I'll be looking at trying to make sure we've got Spectral Mesh HD involved as well at that point. And then I'll take more of a look into temporal vortex before I put it up for official sales, and see what other things could be done with it to sort of like leverage the more processing power in here. But yeah, not too many big resolution things I could switch up without getting some pretty serious slowdowns past, I think it was down to like 9 frames a second if I just tried to do 640 by like 480, which was a bummer, but I mean, that's just the realistic way that like processing power works. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Oh yeah, we got the noise. Fun. I liked just doing the weird like checkerboard interference things. So yeah, that's Temporal Vortex HD. I think covered most of the topics that were requested. This is going to be, I guess, not the longest video in the world. But yeah, in closing, a reminder, I don't read any comments on YouTube anymore. So if you have something you actually wish to express to me, email is a great way to do it, or Scanlines, XYZ. I check Scanlines pretty often. That's a great place to talk about things. I don't really check out the Discord too much these days either, but I'll pop in for another AMA there probably after at the end of April, beginning of May, before I close down this studio here to answer any questions about development, futures, and stuff like that. What else? Yeah, if you haven't joined my Patreon yet and you would like to, you know, see cool things happen with the future of development of stuff, then you should really probably do that, because that's how that kind of thing is going to happen. Or if you just want to like be able to like have a say in what kind of videos happen here, pretty much all of these kind of videos where I like sit down and explain and like talk about things like that, pretty much all going to be funded and suggested through Patreon stuff. So if you ever want me to do that MX1 explainer video, or work on more of the video hardware, like other video hardware explainer videos, stuff like that, definitely join the Patreon. I need to, you know, get it up to 600 for like gear explainer videos, 600 a month for gear explainer videos, and then 800 a month. That's when I'll start doing development stuff, where people can request updates. And I've promised, this is my promise to you, the public, whoever you may be, I will work save states into the VSEJET if we can get up to $800 US a month. Not belying the fact that the general desire for like new things all the time is sort of a mental and emotional disease. But save states would be pretty cool. You gotta admit it. Yeah, so I think that's it for this video. Yeah, check out the Patreon and make some suggestions on over there. And I'll see you in a little bit, actually, because I'm making the next Patreon video probably next week. All right, as always, have fun.